6 Minutes is sponsored by Raycon and new Crystal Meth Pepsi. Hello, I'm Doug Penis. Welcome to 6 Minutes. Tonight's top story. Tragedy at rapper Travis Scott's Astroworld festival, as reports that crowd crush has taken 10 lives. Mr. Scott was quoted saying, "It's not lit," before being diagnosed with a chronic case of black and white forehead rubbing syndrome. Tragically, this is not the first time a music festival has claimed the lives of its guests, or even worse, been a bit of a mid-vibe. On today's 6 Minutes, we're going to continue our expose on music festivals and the fun, chaotic, deadly energy that they traipse onto the rug of life. From our extensive research, we've identified 3 key reasons why music festivals tend to go tits down, arse up. All of these festivals suffer from 1, 2, or even all 3 of these reasons, starting with poor planning. Planning is everything when it comes to music festivals. Corralling tens of thousands of sweaty humans who love nothing more than to eat, drink, shit and piss into a big loud field, and then making sure that they don't leave a bad review on Facebook or die is a logistical nightmare. You have to consider construction, security, food, portaloos, cleaners who go into the portaloos and clean out all the waste with their bare hands, and of course, the talent themselves. 2008's imaginatively titled Zoo 8 managed to fail on pretty much every single one of these fronts when they attempted to plan their first ever music festival inside a safari park in the UK. Get it? Zoo 2008? Because it's in a zoo in 2008? Yeah. The poor planning began at the gates. Queues were atrocious, with many of these zoo-loving ravers, known as zoophiles, forced to stand in line for hours, lugging their camping gear all the while. In addition to limited drinking water, overflowing toilets, and a stupid name, Zoo 2008 forgot the main reason anyone even goes to a music festival, and didn't pay the music people. Dizzy Rascal, The Rascals, and several other bands that weren't mischievous or cheeky people pulled out last minute after they found out they would be performing out of the kindness of their hearts because the festival ran out of money. Or as festival director Ricardo Monti put it, there was significant dissent from artists regarding payment.
Which is a funny way of saying that artists want to be paid for their time.
This lack of funds stemmed from, quote, a miscalculation over cash flow, with the zoo itself having to step in and pony up some pounds to allow the performance to press on. While the organisers put on a brave face and said that they would learn for this for next year's Zoo 2009, this would never actually go ahead. Good thing too, because their dumbass name would stop working after 2009 anyway. Who the fuck wants to go to 2010? While Zoo 2008 was poorly planned across the board, it was at worst a shit vibe that only wasted the time of people who would probably have just been down at the pub anyway. Contrast this to the tragedy of the Indiana State Fair. Abysmal safety regulations and lack of inspections saw the stage collapse on a crowd awaiting the next band, Sugarland. Miscommunications amongst the fair's organisers saw them defer to the band, of all people, about whether or not they should cancel the show over an upcoming storm. Believing it to only be a spot of rain, Sugarland said that they would play regardless. As conditions worsened, it became more and more apparent that an evacuation should occur. And while the crowd was instructed on how to evacuate, they weren't explicitly told that they have to right now. As the festival's executive director was on their way to the stage to announce an actual evacuation, a sudden gust of wind hit the stage, causing it to crumple onto the crowd. 7 people died and 58 were injured. If it wasn't obvious, pretty much everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. The stage's original plans were poorly designed, their review was poorly done, the installation didn't follow the plan, which was bad to begin with, and the final stage was never inspected, as state law didn't require it. $50 million in settlements later, Indiana state law now requires stage inspections. Still, it's hard to quantify what counts as the worst planned festival ever. 7 deaths, 58 injuries, and $50 million in lawsuits ranks you pretty highly, but in terms of consistent, widespread chaos, my money's on Wait, what do you mean 6 minutes has been cancelled? We ran out of money? Oh, don't worry. I have an idea for that. Today's video is sponsored by Raycon. Use my link in the description to get 15% off and free shipping. Look mum, I'm a real YouTuber now. Raycons are quality wireless earbuds that cost half the price of other earbuds. I personally love wearing these little sound spewers at the gym, whether lifting weights or going for a run. Raycon's noise isolation makes it easy to hear your audio no matter your environment, with an awareness mode in case you need to hear your surroundings. Outside of the gym, I use Raycons to listen to the Beef Boys podcast while I walk to work. Okay, yes, it is technically my podcast, but I really do listen back to it when I miss hearing my boys or just making sure I didn't say anything stupid. No Raycons detected. Raycons come with a selection of gel tips so you can find the perfect fit for your ear. I can promise you they will not fall out either, no matter what strenuous activity you put them through. Because of this, Raycons are significantly harder for your friends to suck out of your ears compared to other earbuds. So if you'd like a pair of your own Raycons, click my link in the description to get 15% off your purchase plus free shipping. Thanks again to Raycon for sponsoring this video. The year is 1972, and promoters Tom Duncan and Bob, I forgot his name, were riding high on the profits of their first music festival, the Freedom Festival, and Ice Cream Social. They decided it was their God-given right to host a festival with an even stupider name, and thus the Erie Canal and Soda Pop Festival was born. Sporting a level of self-confidence not seen until the likes of Billy McFarland, Thomas and Bobbis wanted this festival to be bigger than Woodstock, and they would pull it off in just 2 months. With a deadline tighter than Fire Festival, disaster seemed inevitable, but some big names thought it would be an epic prank to throw their considerable weight behind the idea. The planned lineup included the likes of Rod Stewart, Black Sabbath, Cheech and Chong, Fleetwood Mac, and the Eagles. Of course, back then you couldn't just host an AMA or go on Hot Ones in order to promote a festival like kids do today. Instead, Tom and Bob bought a full-page spread in Rolling Stone magazine for around $2,800 USD, or $20,000 when adjusted for inflation. The lads needed to get the Erie Canal Soda Pop Festival in front of as many eyes as they could in order to attract their ideal range of 50 to 60,000 guests in order to hit their profit margins. Before the venue was even locked in, the two had spent over $8.1 million in 2024 dollars, or around $1,134,000,000 V-Bucks. Speaking of venues, with huge headliners, a nationwide advertising campaign, and the sheer mass of Tom and Bob's fat, succulent bulls, their home state of Indiana was starting to get a little worried about the impending migration of hippies. Indiana came up with an elegant solution. They straight up banned the festival from occurring only 8 days after its announcement in early August. This news was especially cringe for Tom and Bob, who had already started punching 500 holes for portable toilets at their initial planned location, the Chandler Raceway. Well, not them personally, but you know what I mean. With no Twitter to let festival goers know that the state of Indiana had issued a restraining order against them, some people began to show up to the empty raceway a week before it was meant to start. They were the lucky ones. Tomo and Bobbit needed somewhere to store the thousands of potential music absorbers who had already bought tickets for $20 a pop, so they came up with a cheeky workaround. They'd dump everyone on Bull Island. While partly within the Indiana state line, 920 of the site's 1,100 acres were within the border of neighbouring Illinois. 4 days before the festival was set to kick off, machinery rocked up and began drilling for water and hamburgers, giving Illinois no time to cockblock this sudden move. State authorities weren't the only ones unprepared for what was about to go down. On Friday, September 1st, 50,000 people had already gathered at the site, putting them at capacity a day before the festival even started. They were only the first quarter of what would eventually swell to a staggering 200,000 people. You'd think arriving early would give you the best seats in the house, but nobody could even enter the site until workers finished scrambling to set things up, meaning there was nowhere to park miles of cars. People would stop their engines, start overheating themselves, and eventually abandon their cars in order to walk the rest of the way on foot. With only 2 roads onto the island, the 150 deserted cars probably didn't do much to help the 30-kilometer long traffic jam on Super Interstate 64. Those who stayed with their cars had to find something to do with themselves, and with gooning still 50 years away from being invented, they had to get creative. Attendee Carrie Jane Roper recalls that with all these cars stopped on the interstate, lots of drug deals were going on. There were people selling hash, LSD, anything. All these people were just having a big party out on the interstate. As the hours wore on, and many people still found themselves trapped outside of the festival, they were forced to camp on the side of the road. But hey, as we saw with Burning Man 23, surviving bizarre situations while high as a kite is what makes lasting memories, right? I'm sure everybody involved will be able to look back and laugh at this soon enough. Well, no. With hordes of hippies flanking from all sides and roads backed the fuck up, resources were dwindling and supplies weren't coming. The festival was surrounded by a freshwater river, so plenty of people whipped out their pink bits for a refreshing spot of skinny dipping. Drinking water, on the other hand, had to be sourced from one of 12 wells, many of which did not work correctly and were considered unwell. And of course, as we've come to expect, the toilet situation wasn't much better. As stated on an article from Aussie.com, with only 6 outhouses and half-dug wells to serve as sanitation, thousands instead took to relieving themselves en masse in what became known as the turd fields and bathing in the Wabash River. Now, you don't have to hire a Harvard PhD astrophysicist to figure out that 6 outhouses means there's around 1 for every 33,333 asses. While unconfirmed, it seems fairly likely that some people would have stooped to going number 1, 2, or even 3 in the river, which makes those skinny dips sound a lot less appealing. Some sources suggest that there were actually 300 wooden toilets, but food shortages prompted people to salvage them for firewood. Reese Catering Service enlisted at the school of fuck around and find out, and continued to raise their prices until they were looted and their food trucks dismantled by 200 attendees. Any wood people could get their hands on was being used to grill food and create wooden pickaxes. And you don't even want to know what they were trying to cook. Oh, wait. Yeah, I guess you do. Sorry. A bunch of people murdered a rival gang cow in a drive-by shooting, but as none of them had ever butchered an animal before, they had no idea what to do with the carcass. The hippies weren't just desperate for food and water anymore. Their hunger was for violence, and their thirst for blood. But mostly still food and water. It didn't help that many of them were partaking in mystery drugs. The festival's PA system warned that someone was selling LSD laced with strychnine, which is literal rat poison.
Yeah, whoever just took LSD, everyone who just took LSD, it's been laced with rat poison, and the Shadow Man you see is going to kill you. I repeat, the Shadow Man you see is going to kill you. Please remain calm.
According to festival victim Kevin Swank, as you walked into the festival, there was a fence with a gate. The gate was open, and on the outside of that fence, there were all kinds of police. But once you walked through that gate, not even 10 feet in, there were people with all kinds of drugs for sale. Whatever you wanted, it was there. There were people sitting there with pipes, rolling papers, marijuana. If you wanted to shoot up heroin, it was there. I don't really see how heroin would be a good vibe at a music festival, but maybe it helped some of the guests calm down after discovering that their favourite artist had dropped out. Joe Cocker never showed up to his Saturday evening set, and even the crowd trying to Beetlejuice him into existence by shouting Cocker repeatedly for 2 hours didn't work. After Black Sabbath rocked up to a crowd 4 times larger than what they were getting paid for, as well as a dead cow getting torn apart by hippies, they demanded more money, and dipped when organisers refused. Tom and Bob paid Rod Stewart $100,000 in advance, only for Rod's manager to fly over the site in creative mode and deem it unsafe, leaving the event rodless. Weed and Bong played for 15 minutes, joked about how shit the festival was, and then pissed off after it started raining. So, to summarise, we've got disappointed, dehydrated, destitute fans taking drugs on empty stomachs, ready to take their anger out on anyone and anything. Remember those catering trucks that were looted? They're on fire now, and their gas tanks exploded. 2 bakery trucks were put in the oven at 325 for 12 to 13 minutes, and a soda trailer went pop in the ensuing chaos. At this point, anger overtook hunger, and a relief truck with more food was hijacked, looted, and burned. For unknown reasons, most people abandoned the festival before its official end on Monday night, but stragglers straggling on the Tuesday morning decided to set the stage on fire because who gives a fuck at that point? Ironically, all the fires and chaos of this proto-Burning Man didn't claim any lives, and instead it was the river that drew first blood when it drowned a bloke. Another overdosed on heroin, but it's believed he had a very good time up until then. Given the substantial bazaar of bizarre substances, I'm surprised that there weren't more overdoses. But the festival did come close to a third death. A truck ran over a makeshift tent while Linda Gray was inside, rudely awakening her with broken ribs and vertebrae. It was a bumpy ride to the ER on the back of a Jeep, but there was a silver lining for old Linda. She got a shout out from Cheech and Chong, who dubbed her as the chick who got run over by a truck. It's unknown whether Linda joined the long list of people suing Tom and Bob over the next decade. Irvin Hagedorn, the landowner of Bull Island, had to spend months bulldozing and burying piles of drugs, burning trash, and literal shit in the wake of the festival. When the boys had no money to pay Irvin's $20,000 bill, he was forced to file a lawsuit. Vendors like Reese Catering's service probably needed compensation for trauma counseling on top of profits lost, and the state governments of both Illinois and Indiana were jonesing for a bit of settlement money too. Most tragically, a local farmer sought damages for cattle lost due to marijuana inhalation. It's unsure whether this was from the cow itself inhaling weed or from the stoners who slaughtered it for the munchies. Bob says the festival ultimately lost them around $200,000, but the boys suffered an even bigger loss: their friendship. Tom and Bob never worked together again, and within a year, Tom had decided that music festivals were not morally right. Not sure how he came to that conclusion. So we've seen what happens when festivals don't plan properly. From running out of money to pay the whole reason that anyone's there, to hippies killing a cow with unarmed damage because you forgot to provide enough food. But even the best laid plans can all get washed down the drain if you just piss off one bloke: the big man upstairs. Time and time again, festivals have been ruined by the same 3-letter word that military commanders and bikini wrestlers have struggled with for centuries: M-U-B. Wait, that doesn't sound right. In our previous expose on the life and times of music and lines, we saw how the Hudson Project, Burning Man, and 2 separate Woodstocks were turned into beautiful brown bogs. While most of these were caused due to clouds squirting all over the place, Woodstock 99 actually had great weather and was instead caused by burst pipes and overflowing portaloos, which added some much needed seasoning to the brown soup. On today's show, we've rounded up 3 of the most muddiest messes we could find as we crown the 2024 Muddiest Festival of the Year, even though none of them happened this year. Now, I swear this wasn't intentional, but all 3 of these took place on the UK, and 2 of them took place on the same bloody island. Coming in at number 3, it's 2008's Bestival. Organised by DJ Rob DeBank and his wife Josie credit card scam, the festival's name is a portmanteau of the words best and festival. That's a real fact someone felt they had to include on the Wikipedia page. Hosted on the Isle of Wight, people, this boutique festival was probably feeling a little bit less boutique after getting southed in spittle. While the weather and mud aren't on the list of attractions you'd want to see at a festival, in the words of Spoonfed's Lowry, conditions on site are as bad as reported, but not so bad that you're stranded or in danger. Merely unpleasant and wet, as British weather tends to be. 2008's fancy dress theme was 30,000 freaks under the sea, so you at least can't fault them for being thematically consistent. Despite the subpar conditions, stubborn ravers pinged on regardless. And while the mud was bad, it can get a whole lot worse. They were even nominated for the best toilets in the 2008 UK Festivals Award. Good for them. Slopping their way into number the second, it's 2012's creatively named Isle of Wight Festival, held on the Isle of Wight. Again, with 55,000 attendees, around 20,000 more than Bestival's, and around a month's worth of rain falling in 24 hours, this one scores higher simply by having more victims. Over 350 cars found themselves trapped in the slurry, creating a traffic jam that had some drivers twiddling their Super Mario themed pills for up to 10 hours. After this jam spread back to the port, 3 ferries were unable to dock, leaving them circling the Southland for hours. The Isle of Wight Festival tragically did not win Best Toilets at the 2012 UK Music Festival Awards, but Bestival 2012 came back to win Best Medium-Sized Festival, so that's nice at least. These overhead shots of the Isle of Wight Festival really show the extent of the mud, but compare that to Glastonbury 2005. Now, I know there could be some dissent amongst the viewers here because this, technically lies beyond the border of mud into flood, but in terms of a weather event disrupting a music festival, I mean, come on, what the fuck? With over twice as many guests as the Isle of Wight Festival, over 100,000 people got to enjoy watching their tents and stools become submerged in water, and multiple stages and one of the bars get struck by lightning. Even if you were confident in your swimming ability, medical staff advised against trying to swim and retrieve your belongings, as submerged toilets had made the brown water browner. So congratulations Glastonbury 2005, come up and accept your award. It's a $19 McDonald's gift card. It says 25 on there, but I got some hash browns on the way here. Sorry. No speeches, get the fuck off the stage. So you've got mud and you've got poor planning. But what happens when the two meet for a whirlwind romance that spawns hosted in Belgium since 2005, Tomorrowland has almost as many Best Festival Awards as it has DJs. And it has a lot of DJs. It hit triple digits for the first time in 2008 with 100 DJs performing, and peaked in 2023 with 600 performances across 14 stages. I'm assuming not all at once. With musicians like civil rights legend David Guetta,
shout out to his family,
Swedish Fish Mafia, Pendulum, and Skrillex, Tomorrowland's reputation allowed it to grow some benign spin-offs. Following the Super Mario Land to World naming convention, Tomorrowland became TomorrowWorld in America. And that's where our story of dirt, downpours, and disorganization takes place. The first couple TomorrowWorlds went off without too much drama. The team chose the Chattahoochee Hills near Atlanta, Georgia, not just because it's fun to say Chattahoochee, but because it resembles Tomorrowland's traditional location of Boom, Belgium, which is also fun to say. Expectations were high going into 2015's attempt, which is reasonable because the tickets weren't cheap. General admission with access to their themed campsite Dreamville was around $417, which wasn't that unreasonable given that's $1 per DJ. But unlike the other festivals that we've covered in this video, TomorrowWorld's social media seems weirdly preoccupied with payment plans. Given the success of previous years, organisers were optimistic heading into the festival's first day on Friday, September 25th. The gates opened, and their optimism paid off for the most part. There were some logistical issues cropping up, particularly around parking and transport, which in retrospect was actually a bit of foreshadowing. TomorrowWorld sucked. Worst festival ever. Worst experience. People sleeping on the street. TomorrowWorld sold an experience that was not delivered. I lost my first day waiting for a shuttle for 4 hours 50... What the fuck? After the party, it took me another 3 hours to get out of the party without the shuttle, because that would take at least another 4 hours for a shuttle. I had to pay $80 for a security from the party to take me to my car. Sure, some people weren't having a good enough time to justify the $400 tickets, but attendance was matching that of 2014, and a lot of people were going into the second day with a spring in their step. Oh. Over 72 hours, 35 millimeters of liquid water rained on TomorrowWorld's parade. If that doesn't sound like a lot to you, it's because it isn't. As one attendee described, it wasn't like torrential rain the last few days, it was just good, steady rain. Of course, water is water, and the field's grassy plain quickly turned into a muddy plain. As mentioned, this festival's downfall was both mud and poor planning, and it seems like the team at TomorrowWorld just had nothing in place in case of shitty weather. When the mud began to evolve into a bog, the organisers decided to make the genius move of closing all roads to TomorrowWorld and cancelling all of the shuttles out. The several thousand people who weren't camping at nearby Dreamville were now stranded on 5,000 acres of mud without food, water, or shelter. With shuttles no longer in operation, attendees now had to walk the many muddy miles home to their accommodation or to the Uber lot where they could theoretically hail a ride. Despite the ride-sharing app being a major partner of the event, there weren't nearly enough drivers to accommodate the thousands of wannabe riders. Naturally, this triggered Uber's beloved surge pricing feature, with many riders being forced to pay upwards of $300 to escape this brown hell. That's assuming you could even call a ride in the first place, as T-Mobile, another major sponsor of the event, proved their superior service by failing to have adequate coverage at the Uber pickup point. Others resorted to sleeping on top of police cars or straight on the muddy ground, which I'll remind you isn't just a bad time, it's dangerous. Sleeping in wet clothes without shelter carries a real risk of hypothermia. Some combination of good Samaritans and budding entrepreneurs offered people cheaper rides in the comments section of these posts, but even they were drowned out by the backlash. Comments like these were the only public indication that something was going wrong. It wasn't until the third and final day that TomorrowWorld finally provided an update. Only those staying at Dreamville would have access to the festival on Sunday the 27th. This meant everyone else not only had to struggle through the night trying to get home to their accommodation, they wouldn't even be allowed back to the festival. While the final day did end up going ahead, artists like the Chainsmokers and David Guetta played to a withered crowd. So, mud and shite planning can be a pretty big dampener by themselves, even more so when they fusion dance. But it's time we dive into the third and final sin of music festivals: overcrowding. This often goes hand in hand with poor planning, as a well-planned event should theoretically know how many people they can feasibly fit. We've already seen how a massive crowd helped derail the Erie Canal Soda Pop Festival, but while this strained food, transport, and facilities, the island was at least large enough to accommodate everyone. On the light end of the overcrowding scale, you end up with events like the Great Googa Mooga. This weirdly racist sounding festival was actually a food and drink festival that, unlike the Erie Canal Festival, had the exact same amount of attendees as tickets sold. For a music festival, this would have been great. But since the main attraction were food and drink vendors who can only serve a few people at a time, I'm sure you can see how this might be an issue. Organisers clearly underestimated how many attractions they would need in order to feed and entertain their chosen crowd size, leaving people roasting under the sun for hours as they lined up for some chicken tenders that, more often than not, would be sold out by the time you got to the counter. As Eddie Huang from Bauhaus described it, like a monsoon of uncontrollable soul-burning diarrhea, the foodies descended upon us. We knew the fuckers were coming, but none of us had ever seen it on this scale. By 1 PM, it became clear that most of us would run out of food before the day was up. It happens at every festival, but this was an avalanche. We frantically called our restaurants, rallied our staff, and radioed for reinforcements as barbarians stormed the gate, frothing at the mouth for horse meat bologna and foie gras. Of course, on the other end of the overcrowding scale, you get The first Astroworld festival was held in 2018 and bears a suspicious resemblance to Travis Scott's 2018 album of the same name. A week after the album dropped, Travis announced his plans to host a music festival of his very own on November 17th in his hometown of Houston, Texas. Astroworld was named after a now defunct Six Flags park that Travis used to visit as a kid, and the rapper hoped that this festival would bring back the beloved spirit and nostalgia of Astroworld, making a childhood dream come true. It did not. While the founders of the Erie Canal Soda Pop Festival inexplicably landed on a stellar lineup, Astroworld's founder is a lo-fi hip-hop beats to study 2 legend with 8 Grammy nominations and 4 Billboard Top 100 chart toppers under his belt, with Travis Scott headlining alongside 12 of his musical besties, including Lil Malone and Post Wayne. The inaugural Astroworld drew around 40,000 people to NRG Park. After some successful sloppy seconds in 2019, 2020's Astroworld was cancelled for some reason that we're all collectively deciding to forget. So everyone was excited for the next one in November of 2021. Travis wasn't keen on moving to a new location because NRG Park was very close to where the original Astroworld was. So while the festival was growing, the venue was not. This Astroworld would instead be held over 2 days, and all 100,000 tickets were sold out in less than an hour before the lineup was even announced. This meant twice as many tickets were sold for a venue that previously only held 50,000 people. Authorities and organisers intended to limit the crowd to 70,000 on the first night, lowering that to 50,000 closer to the date. So I guess you're just shit out of luck if you show up late and can't get into the concert you paid for. After announcing that the tickets had sold out, Travis declared, "No, and we still sneak in the wild ones in." Sadly, for the victims of this tragedy, this is nothing new for him. Travis was arrested in 2015 and 2017 for encouraging fans to act up and breach barriers, and 3 people were arrested at Astroworld 2019 after the crowdie got rowdy. Astroworld 2021 would be no different. Security staff would start arriving around 6 AM and eventually would number around 500, double that of Astroworld 2019. With twice as many tickets sold, that math works out good, right? Except for the fact that 1 in 5 security staff had only been hired a few days before the event, and many of them had only gotten their required security licensing the night before. Amongst them was Darius Williams, who described his accreditation as an open book test. The teacher, he was actually giving us the answers as we were going through the books ourselves, and trying to hurry up and fill out the answers. Darius and his newly minted comrades would be supported by 530 Houston police officers. Travis had already begun sneaking the wild ones in, and a police lieutenant had to call for riot gear from the Houston Fire Department before the event had even begun. The crowd was already getting rowdy, and 530 police officers doesn't sound like a good match compared to the 5,000 ticketless gatecrashers who would break in over the next few hours. Metro Boomin wouldn't start the opening set until 1 PM, so many enthusiastic fans decided to kill some time at the merch booths. So much, in fact, that one of them had to close less than an hour after opening. They didn't run out of merch. They were just scared. The Astroworld website apparently didn't list bolt cutters on the list of prohibited items, as they were used to breach gates and break into VIP areas. Of course, banning them probably wouldn't have done much anyway, because while drugs were prohibited, understaffed medical teams still struggled to deal with an overload of overdoses. Patient logs from medical contractors Paradox Worldwide showed that 54 people needed medical attention by 4 PM, and by 8:15 PM, they'd ran out of the naloxone needed to treat opioid overdoses. It reached a point where medical staff didn't even have the capacity to log individual patients, so it's impossible to know exactly how many people were actually treated. But whatever that number was, it was about to go up. At 8 PM, SZA finished what would be the final performance on the Thrill stage so that everyone could gather at the Chill stage for Travis Scott's headlining performance. At 8:30 PM, a countdown begins for for Travis's performance. At 9:01 PM, the countdown reaches 0, and the full force of the crowd surges forwards as Travis Scott comes out to the song Escape Plan. At this point, fans aren't just screaming from excitement, and the authorities are starting to get the first reports of a crowd crush, with somewhere between 40 to 55,000 people all surging forwards at once. Some people were being compressed in a way where they couldn't move their arms, and in some cases couldn't expand their chests enough to breathe. Less than 30 minutes into the set, an emergency vehicle awkwardly hobbles its way through the dense crowd, which some guy then climbs on top of. Travis Scott graciously paused his performance and asked people to make room for the vehicle, but somehow was unable to hear the cries to stop the show from the crowd.
Stop this show! Stop this show!
Houston, just make some motherfucking noise real quick, y'all.
Realizing they're going to have to find their own help, at least 5 911 calls are made by 9:35 PM, while others start to climb scaffolding in order to tell camera operators they need to stop the show, who pretty much tell them to piss off. The idea of seeing people collapsing around you with grey skin and blue lips after being deprived oxygen and then just having everyone around you be completely indifferent to the situation is just such a terrifying thought. Some of these videos capture these awful scenes of people collapsing while everyone around is chanting to stop the show and looking for help, while other videos from the exact same time show people singing and dancing along, just blissfully unaware of what's happening, 50 meters away from them and what could potentially happen to them soon. It wasn't until 9:59 PM, after 5 cases of cardiac arrest, that Travis hears via an earpiece that he needs to stop the show soon. He wasn't told to end the show now, though, so he decides that his suffering fans could use a pick-me-up in the form of a surprise performance by Drake. Despite Travis stopping the show 3 times to point out unconscious fans to his security, him and Drake would later state that they were completely unaware of the multiple chants from fans to stop. 1 minute before the show finally ends to the tune of Goosebumps, Rudy Pena is declared dead at an ER at 10:13 PM. By the time 9-year-old Ezra Blount passed away on November 14th, the death toll had risen to 10. All of these casualties were from compression asphyxia, where there is an external force that is limiting the ability of the chest to expand and for air to get into the lungs. Astroworld's second day was cancelled. By November 9th, 820 victims and relatives had all filed suits totaling more than $3 billion in damages. While promoters, vendors, and security companies were amongst the list of defendants, Travis Scott was the big golden face of Astroworld, and he was catching a lot of flack. He was dropped as a headliner of Coachella 2022, was forced to discontinue his brand new cactus seltzer drink, and most devastatingly, his emotes were removed from Fortnite. In an attempt to appear human, Travis put out one of the worst apology videos I've ever seen. Unable to muster any real emotions besides the frustration that he has to deal with all this shit now, he instead attempts to convey sadness by constantly rubbing his forehead and putting a black and white filter over it. In the video, he takes zero responsibility for anything and asks his fans to go to the authorities if they have any information. Bro, shouldn't you have the information? But it took less than a year for things to turn around for old Travis. His first performance post Astroworld was just 6 months later at the 2022 Billboard Music Awards, and his latest album Utopia debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Top 200. Sure, he had to settle a few cases out of court, but with renewed Nike and Dior partnerships, Travis basically got away with it scot-free. Hey, if you like this video, I'm sure you'd like the other Festival Scandals one if you haven't seen that yet. Otherwise, YouTube is just going to recommend some bullshit for you. I don't know what it is, but apparently it thinks you like it. So, I guess click that if you like.